My name is Austin Williams, and just like to thank everyone here for coming to this Bookshop Barney with Professor Kathleen Stock, looking at this book, Do Not Go Gentle. You can see it in the glare, Do Not Go Gentle, the case against assisted death. There are details in the chat function about where you can get the book if you haven't already got it, as well as a few other bits and bobs. That poem, Do Not Go Gentle, one of my favorites, is by Dylan Thomas, written exactly 75 years ago this year. A man who is thought to have killed himself with drink, but in fact was assisted by a doctor who injected him with too much morphine. As Esther Ransom might say, that's life. But it's not the most lighthearted of topics, because it's a particularly heavy subject, I think. So a little bit about Kathleen before we start. Kathleen is a columnist at Unheard, co-director of the Lesbian Project. Until 2021, she was a professor of philosophy at Sussex University, but I won't rake over that old ground. If you haven't seen the BBC4 documentary Speechless, I thoroughly recommend it. Importantly, she was awarded an OBE for services to higher education in 2020, so she got the last laugh. And we're extremely grateful. If people didn't hear that earlier on, she's come off her sick bed to be with us tonight. So many, many thanks indeed. Very, very grateful indeed. On the topic, Kim Ledbetter's Terminally Ill Adults End of Life Bill is the spark for this book. Even though the proponents of the bill were given an extraordinary amount of time to discuss it, it's been timed out, or at least the end of this week it should be. Was it filibustering? Was it legitimate scrutiny? Was it anti-democratic? Was it necessary? These are questions we can talk about. But really, in terms of the book, it's a great presentation, brilliantly researched, really intelligently argued, and quite emotionally engaging. And in this session, we'll explore the argument from Kathleen that we're all going to die, but maybe we shouldn't be so keen to welcome it. It's clearly a polarized discussion. The Guardian says that Stock's book is admirably clear and cogent. The Telegraph says it's intellectually powerful, while at the Unheard discussion, David Aronovich was just plain rude in his usual fashion. The way the Barney works is Kathleen will speak for 5 minutes, then I'll raise maybe 5 or so questions just to give a bit more time for her to have a bite of the cherry, if she's up to it. And if you haven't read it yet, you'll get a clearer understanding of some of her arguments. And then it's out to you, the audience, for questions and comments. Criticism's okay as long as it's in good faith. And again, finally, if you want to make a donation to the Barney to continue the Bookshop Barneys, it would be very much appreciated. Information is in the chat. So finally, don't want to make this like a dignitas oration, but Kathleen is not well, and so we're grateful for any time she can be with us. So before we start, can we just unmute if we would and give a round of applause? That would be grateful. So, Kathleen, over to you if you would.
Okay.
Just 5. Thanks.
So thank you for having me. I'm sorry, I'm not over-egging it. I really am quite crook, and I keep coughing, so I'm just going to have to stop and mute my mic every now and again. So I've got 5 minutes. And so I just thought I would talk through some major themes of the book. So first of all, it's not against assisted death at the level of the individual act between two people. It's about the systematization of assisted death and what happens when you import it into a national health service, as would have happened here and may well still happen in a future iteration of the bill. And when you mesh it with legal systems, social care systems, health systems, and what happens then. So I'm very much against that. I start the book by distinguishing between two, what I think are the two main ostensible justifications for assisted death. One of them is freedom, and the other is what I call merciful help, or mercy, compassion, something like that. Freedom is a tempting justification for many because they think that they're asking for something that will free them from the burden of death, really, or pain, suffering, give them some control over a natural death. But actually, I argue that it's a bit of a red herring, because if you try and justify assisted death in a classical liberal framework of rights, those rights are usually construed as rights of non-interference. leave me alone to get on with this. If I want to kill myself, I can. But that's not what's being asked for in these systematized forms. What's being demanded as a so-called right is assistance, which is very opposite of non-interference. It's intervention. So even though I can see how it will give some people a choice that they don't have now, that doesn't mean that it necessarily makes them freer. And it certainly doesn't make that other people who don't want that choice freer, because in a sense they are now under the burden of that choice, as I'll possibly explain. So with freedom dispatched for the moment, I turn to merciful help. Excuse me. Excuse me for it. So merciful help, I think, is a better justification, at least philosophically, for assisted death systems, because it does seem like when you get rid of all the rhetoric, what people are really trying to do is alleviate pain and suffering through the means of assisted death. And that's why the cohort that's inevitably first selected is terminally ill people, because it's assumed that terminally ill people are uniquely suffering in a way that cannot otherwise be relieved. So it's important to spell that out. Even in a bill like Leadbeater's, which didn't mention pain and suffering at all, it wasn't a coincidence that it was aimed at the terminally ill. The terminally ill are presumed to be suffering dreadfully, and therefore it's considered a good thing to intervene. It's not a matter of leaving them alone. It's a good thing to intervene and end their lives. Having said that, I go on to argue that construed from the perspective of merciful help, assisted death systems are not very merciful. And you just to summarize, given I've only got a few minutes, I can name the circles of concern in no particular order, but starting with terminally ill people themselves, even terminally ill people who want an assisted death. It isn't necessarily, the systems we're going to get aren't necessarily very good for them, because they're not very good at safeguarding whether they're really ill enough. So, in other words, whether their prognoses are accurate. They're not very good at ascertaining whether this is a transitory state of mind that might, as the months progress, assuming they have some, alleviate and lift, as often does straight after a prognosis of terminal illness. And they're not very good for ascertaining whether these people are have capacity, because the standard capacity test that's used in other contexts is unfit for purpose when you're trying to decide whether you should help someone kill themselves. Again, for reasons I can go into. Moving outward, assisted death systems are not very merciful for terminally ill people who do not want the choice, because now they have it. And that means that there is now a socially acceptable option of killing themselves available to them that would be facilitated through the NHS, and which is in fact now being advertised as a good thing for those people that want it. And that's available to everybody in the right who satisfies the eligibility criteria. So there's lots of people that don't want that choice, and they don't want to have to explain to their relatives why they don't want to take it, and they don't want to explain even to themselves why they don't want to take it. But now they'll have to. In systems where assisted death is there, everybody has to then justify themselves as soon as they get into the eligibility category why they don't take it. Moving outward again, assisted death systems are not merciful towards disabled people, because disabled people quite often, I mean physically disabled, permanently disabled people, quite often, as this point is very well made by Liz Carr in her documentary on the BBC, called Better Off Dead, I think, or something like that. Disabled people often share bodily conditions with terminally ill people. Failure to control bodily functions, incapacity, pain, and all of those things are now badged up as undignified, so undignified that it's a good thing to offer an early death to people that have them in certain circumstances. It's very hard to insulate that attitude from society as a whole. Quite often, well, I think we see from looking at other systems that, in fact, it doesn't help disabled people's desire to live fulfilled lives when there's a system already in place in the same society saying that those things are so deeply undignified that death might be a better solution. Moving outward again, and I'll stop in a second. Another group of people who you don't hear from much in these discussions is relatives and families, loving relatives and families who do not want their loved ones to have an early death. So this the stereotype we're given by the pro-assisted death lobby is of everything's perfect, the relatives are very much on board, it's a wonderful experience for all concerned, but often it isn't. In fact, there's no requirement on family on people who are getting an assisted death to even tell their family that they're getting one. So relatives can be completely blindsided because it's considered an absolutely individual choice. But even when they are told, they might be very much against it. They might say, no, no, just as you would if anyone told you I'm about to kill themselves. It's not always going to result in oh, that's a great idea. I'm thoroughly behind you. People are going to be very upset. And then there's a lot of anxiety going to be in the world once these systems are in place because some families have particularly vulnerable family members who they worry will get sucked into these systems. So, for instance, parents of learning disabled adults, they're not excluded from assisted death services, and there's lots of reasons to think that they might be more easily persuaded than others, but those sorts of considerations don't seem to be addressed in assisted death systems. And finally, I mean, this is a sketch, but we need to think about the effect of assisted death systems on society generally, and its attitude to suicide generally, and its attitude to pain and suffering generally, because we do seem to be endorsing the idea that if suffering gets too bad, you can check out, and not only can you check out, but we'll help you. The state will help you. Now, again, that's going to be extremely difficult to isolate that that attitude from other attitudes about suicide prevention. You know, there's going to come a point. So just before you get the 6-month prognosis, the doctor's absolutely supposed to stop you from trying to kill yourself. Just after you get the 6-month prognosis, the doctor can say, oh, have you thought we'll help you? That's a really strange, almost kind of schizophrenic attitude to put the medical system in. So for all of those reasons, I think it's not convincing to think that assisted death systems are merciful. What I do think is would be a better solution, given that we are standing at a crossroads in the UK where we can decide where we put our funds and where we don't. I think investing in palliative care is much, much more merciful. It won't be to everyone's taste or choice, and there will be people that want the choice. But what my point is that for certain individuals to have the choice they want will impose all sorts of secondary costs on other people, and that all things being equal, if the aim is to mercifully relieve pain and suffering towards the end of life, palliative care is there. It's not funded properly. It's incredibly patchy. And I understand why at the individual level it might seem like this is a fantasy choice that I'm not even getting. So why can't I just be helped to die? But again, we're not deciding what's happening at the individual level. I keep insisting we should be standing back and saying, what will we put societal resources into and what effects will that have on the whole? And I predict, and lots of other people predict, that once we bring assisted dying in, palliative care will actually be undermined in that it will become much less attractive to fund it, given there's a cost-effective alternative just around the corner. So those are some of the complicated effects, complicated consequences, I think, that we really need to think about seriously and stop listening to these kind of utopian, everything is going to be perfect. Only those that want it will get it, and there'll be no secondary effects on the whole. And that's what I try and get across in the book.
Thank you very much indeed, and I get across it. You do very, very well, I have to say. But let me just quickly ask you a couple of questions, if you still have the larynx for it.
Yeah.
The Ledbetter Private Members Bill, as I say, it's about to be killed off in the Lords. But the rumor is very strong rumor that it's going to come straight back in the next session in Parliament, and they're going to try and force it through yet again. I was just wondering because in the book you do talk about it's been decades long conversations about bringing assisted dying in from way back 100 years ago. I wondered why this topic hasn't been allowed to die peacefully, or what is it about this topic, especially maybe for this government or this time, that's it's such a flagship issue.
Well, I think yeah, it's interesting in the book to track the metamorphosis of the conversation from the early 20th century when it was discussed in the Lords to now. And back then, it was all about merciful help. There was no mention of freedom or choice. It was assumed that the patient would be dying in agony, and that was the only context in which it would ever be appropriate. It wasn't thought that you would be killing people, helping people to die 6 months before the end. It would be right at the last. They were talking about what happened right at the end. And it was about knowing when the moment was right and intervening with the doctor's expertise. I mean, all of that sounds old-fashioned now, including doctors' expertise, in the sense that they were relying on a system that had family doctors that knew you very well, that had cared for you throughout your life. And we all know that in the public health system these days, you don't meet the same doctor twice for a start. So how they would know when this was the right moment for you to go is moot. But also these days, as you imply, we talk about freedom and choice a lot more. In fact, it's become the dominant idiom through which we understand practically everything. It's the only moral value that, hyperliberal society like ours can even recognize is freedom. Freedom to do what we want with our bodies, freedom to do what we want, sorry, with our money, etc. But so I just think that there's something about the fantasy of control over death that fits very well with the dominant concerns of the 21st century. We're also very health conscious. We're tracking everything. We're looks maxing. We're whatever the words are. I'm not doing it obviously. But, uh, just a concern with bodily health, perfecting ourselves, controlling things, being maximally free to do whatever we want and not being held back. All of that fits very well with the idea that like death, illness and death are things we can't control very well. So let's take control of them and do it on our own terms. That all sounds wonderful. My point is you can't get a system that would ever deliver that. All it will deliver is cock-ups because it's the NHS, and actually people possibly being less free. And just to add, it's ironic, but people that in the early 20th century were very much for assisted dying, didn't want guidelines and policy. They wanted to do it on their own terms. They thought guidelines and policy would slow them down and mess it up. So, yeah, there you go.
No, very good, very good. Well, I mean, I'm always amused by the fact that it's a 6 months prognosis. You won't get to see a GP in 6 months, so maybe that's the killer argument. But anyway, look, again, just to mention Kevin, since he's in the audience here, you say that you're not against the assisted dying principle, which I think is very interesting, in as much as, and you mentioned it in your introduction, because you're actually against the institutionalization of death. I just wondered, if there is no principle, is the main difference that might come out of this the fact that the government will say that what they're proposing is legal, and in your model, you still advocate that people who do it should be prosecuted. So is that, I mean, do they win
No,
on that principle?
no, because so I like Kevin, who's present. I'm not against the institutionalization of death, and I don't think he's against the particular act either, although he can speak for himself. But towards the end of the book, I point out, so we hear a lot about how we hear a lot from the pro-assisted death lobby that people who want to assist their relatives to die are in a terrible spot because they have to face all this anguish of the fear of prosecution. Or if they go to Switzerland, they have to worry. If they accompany someone to Switzerland, they have to worry about coming home without them. That's just not true because in 2008, Keir Starmer made it really very difficult to prosecute situations like that. And I just did a podcast last week with Ken MacDonald, who is the director of public prosecutions. And he said hardly any cases crossed my desk as it was, and we prosecuted hardly any of them because the bar is now raised quite high for a public interest prosecution. So the whole spectre of this anxiety that is supposed to accompany people, and we're supposed to alleviate, again, lift that burden of anxiety from these poor people by putting in this huge apparatus of death to stop people worrying about that. That's a sledgehammer to crack a pretty non-existent nut. So I don't actually take a view on whether it should be decriminalized. I don't think it should be decriminalized completely, because I think there should be a deterrent, because there's plenty of reasons why it shouldn't be. There should be some thought put into, whether you're, well, put it this way, as we know, lots of family members have motives to help with the suicides of vulnerable people, as long as there's wills involved or estates involved, or people are just fed up with caring for them. All of those things still apply in that case, as they apply in the institutionalized case. But I wouldn't have gone to the trouble of writing a book about that issue if it had just been about decriminalization between friends or relatives. It's the medicalization of it that really puts it into a completely different level, I think.
Yeah, but yeah, that medicalization. Again, you talk about and it's straightforward points really. You say it puts the medical professionals in a new ethical territory. That's a given. I was wondered whether you would approve of a conscience clause for doctors who don't want to offer this service. Were it to go through, and let's be honest, next parliamentary session it possibly will go through. Would a conscience clause suffice? And if would that be a slippery slope, allowing doctors to opt out of interventions that they don't approve of?
Oh God. I mean, it depends what you mean by approve of. Like, I'm against the whole system. So no, I wouldn't approve. I would certainly wouldn't suffice to get rid of all the worries that I've articulated in the book, not at all. But if we have to have it, then of course there has to be a conscience clause, because you have to allow people. I mean, what the hell are the talk about freedom is if you can't give people freedom to withdraw from this act, just as you do, I think, with abortion.
I think you mentioned in the book the fact that were that to be the case, well, even if it goes forward, the fact that there will be a cohort of people who are supportive of it that will
Well,
actually kind of push this idea much more
what I
fervently
was
than
going
they
to
do at the
say is
moment.
that's the trouble, that like people will opt out. Obviously, lots of doctors will not want to do this. It's not why they went into medicine.
Yeah.
They'll opt out, but that will leave others who are very keen. And that's what you see in countries like Canada, where particular doctors become known as specialists. They rack up huge numbers. They are probably more relaxed about the rules than other people because they're so messianic about delivering people, as they put it, from pain. And you can see an example in Liz Carr's documentary. Um, there's a couple of female doctors I talk about in the book who, are on record because they're constantly proselytizing about assisted death. They seem entranced by it. We'll get people like that too. Of course we will, because all human nature is here, and we'll get it. And then networks get set up. So if this doctor says no, they do what's called doctor shopping, and they end up with these much more enthusiastic types.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you criticize the debate. Sorry if I'm using words like approve of. I don't really mean it in that sense. But you do say that it's a resounding validation of individualistic thinking, the assisted dying debate, like you just mentioned about hyperliberalism at the beginning there. At the end of the book, you say, do we continue to act as if every human life is valuable, no matter what its owner thinks? And also, that's a very big statement. Do you know what I mean? We have the freedom on one side, and then maybe we have to override what people think or desire. I just wondered whether, we do at the moment have health services which allow people to die by turning off life support systems. We have do not resuscitate notices. I just wondered whether your critique of this, only thinking about the social impacts and less about the individual impacts, where does that lead?
I need to make a big distinction. I do in the book. Everyone has to, between withdrawing treatment and actively administering poison via orally or into a vein. Um,
Yeah,
it's not in the interest of the assisted death lobby to blur those two things, but they're completely different. It's the difference between, coming across someone who's clinging onto a cliff. It's a difference between not helping them and actively hammering on their knuckles so they fall off. And sometimes you might say, well, there's no moral difference between those two things, and there's philosophers that have argued that. But there's still a conceptual difference between not doing something and something happens and doing it so that thing happens. And again, my constant refrain is let's go back to the system. It's the system that positively administers poison versus the system that negatively withdraws treatment. And I think withdrawing of treatment is not is consistent with saying that every human life is valuable. Um, it's because it's reaching a recognition that the end is nigh, as it were. Not every case of withdrawing of treatment will be like that. There will be some that are obviously wrong, and cases like the Liverpool care pathway, we saw those. But yeah, I mean, I recognize that you can push a bit and get sort of blurry intuitions here because they look quite similar from the outside, but I insist that we have to have a difference because we have that difference in the legal system all the time between not doing something and doing it. We can't just pretend those two things are exactly the same.
No, I agree. I agree. Obviously, it's practical, and obviously, you spend a long time concentrating on the philosophical conversation. I just wanted to make that clear to the listeners. Just in terms of what you write about Malthus, there's objectivism you talk about, and then you talk about Malthusianism, which I'm very interested in myself. Not a proponent, I'm an opponent to it. But Malthusianism, which argues that there's too many people using up too many resources, just to be simplistic about it. But it's becoming quite a common and dangerous argument these days, whether it's environmentalism or whether it's saying older generations have destroyed the planet or Brexit voters have destroyed the economy or triple lock pensions are unfair, whatever it is. There does seem to be this kind of generational kind of divide becoming a very acceptable conversation today. And I just wondered whether that, there's an equally corrosive conversation in generation wars terms that is creeping into this discussion about assisted dying. Do you recognize it, or have I made that up?
Generational wars creeping into assisted dying. Uh, I mean, must admit I had to recognize that. When I talk about Malthus, I'm talking about a kind of different justification that gets offered, which is a utilitarian one that we really need to introduce a mechanism into economic society to deal with the fact that people are living longer, dementia's getting more prevalent, the birth rate's dropping, the pensions are going to collapse, and all the rest of it. So actually, we need to make. Matthew Paris says it's not just a right; it's a duty. We should be going for assisted death when our time is up, and it's not be a drain on the state. Now, I'm not very keen on that either, as you can imagine. Um, yeah, but it is an interesting question. My initial answer is that I don't, with the exception of some high profile people, um, like Esther Rantzen, for instance, I get the feeling that a lot of the proponents of assisted death are well off their elderly years. And it's at least I could say that it's a preoccupation not just of old people, if it is at all, but also of younger people who fear old age and feel obviously apparently feel disgusted by the thought of becoming old, infirm, dysfunctional. And that's interesting. And I'm not sure it's healthy that the debate should about what happens to old people should be driven by the fears of young people who are not even old yet, because actually quite a lot of research shows that when you get there, it's not quite as bad as you think.
Yeah, we never think we're going to get there, though, do we? I mean, but it's also that question for young people, which is the fear of the future rhetoric. We're all going to drown in the global warming, or the old people
Yeah,
have taken
yeah.
now living standards, and we're going to live in a worse life than our parents did. There's a kind of a fear of the future conversation, which seems to be permeating a lot of this conversation as well. But like I said, I don't want to
Mm,
impose my own rhetorical flourishes on your argument.
that's fine.
Um, just my final question, I suppose. I mean, I've got a lot more questions, but we haven't got time. But you don't really mention COVID. Now, I don't know whether that's good or bad, right? But because it was a transformative moment when the state had dominion, as Dylan Thomas might have said, when the state had dominion over our lives, or how we lived and how we died. Um, in hindsight, a lot of people are suggesting that it undermined the belief in a caring state because we recognize that it was actually quite cruel. But do you think that it might also have legitimized the notion of an isolated, cruel death? Um, that's what many people went through or witnessed, and to that extent, assisted dying bill now looks positively benign by comparison. I mean, I'm not suggesting this is a conspiracy rhetoric, but I'm trying to work out whether there is any kind of correlation societally about how we see these things.
I mean, I'm speculating, but I would think COVID messed us up in all sorts of ways, which are, mutually compatible. So yes, I'm sure it made people extra scared of death. Some of them still are, clearly. Um, I think also I mean, at the time there was a almost, to some eyes, perverse, not perverse, I don't know, but I don't know, I don't want to phrase this carefully, but the aim was just to save Granny, as it were, wasn't it? Like basically everyone had to lock down for elderly and vulnerable people, which made us seem very caring. And I find it quite strange the juxtaposition with that rhetoric, which everybody seemed to get behind, bang for the NHS and all the rest of it, versus assisted dying rhetoric only a few years later. And is there some kind of pendulum swing that way? Is there some kind of resentment of what the country went through? I don't know. Um, well, clearly there is, but is it manifesting itself in that particular way? I don't know. But yeah, I'm sure sociologically there's lots of interesting questions about how those things mesh. But I didn't mention it because, I mean, it's such a lightning rod for various preoccupations, and I don't want to split my audience any more than I have to when I talk about these things. So,
You didn't want to split your audience, so you wrote a book about assisted dying.
well, I like to split them in predictable ways, like
Okay.
chase
Well, I
every
mean,
rabbit.
yeah. Well, just on that point, it's one of these kind of great polarizing conversations. I mean, the government brought in the legislation to counter online harm just a few years ago to stop pro-suicide websites, and now 2 years later, we're having this conversation about the assisted suicide benefiting society in general being discussed in Parliament. So I know that there's confusion upon confusion on this conversation. Look, Kathleen, that's a cracking start. Um, Keep taking the Lemsips. If you can bear with us for a few more moments, I'd be very, very grateful to you. So, look, it's kind of open to the audience now as to whether you want to raise anything that you've heard or whether you have any additional points to offer. Please put your hand up. Okay, we'll take Martin, if you would, please.
Thank
Yeah.
you. And thank you, Kathleen, for not being close to death, but for soldiering on in difficult circumstances. And I'm a great admirer of your work and what you've stood up for in the past and fought through. But one shouldn't, in football, you should play the ball, not the man. And I think in philosophy, you should play the argument, not the philosopher. So I particularly wanted to just come on to this point about the values at play here. And you made this point about freedom and choice and hyper-liberalism. I quite like that term. And that generally we're in a society now that's sticking up for freedom, individual choice, and so on. And I suppose I'm thinking now in compare and contrast with what you've said and written about assisted dying or suicide, as some people call it, with the question of abortion, which is not so much a hot potato in this country anymore as it is, for example, in the United States. Here, it seems to be universally held to be acceptable and was recently decriminalized. And I suppose you might say that it's also been medicalized, to use that term. So I suppose my question is one of consistency. I wanted to ask you, do you think somebody who follows your views on assisted dying should be now going down the road for opposing abortion and the woman's right to end a potential life due to her own free will?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. 1 second, Kathleen, if you don't mind, would you mind if I just take a couple?
No, go for it.
Just in case there's a common thread that you might find between a few of them. I obviously avoided mentioning even the word abortion in this conversation. I didn't want to drag us into another track of dangerous moral territory. But there you go. Always one, isn't there? Kevin.
Well, first of all, thanks very much, Kathleen. I mean, it's a fantastic book, and you write so beautifully that it's one of those ones that I wish I'd have written, as you do. So that was fantastic. Not only that, but it's come at a really excellent time. I thought before, it'll all be over by then, and but it's absolutely of the moment. So it's a fantastic time that it's published. I'm so glad it's actually there. My question really is that why in your kind of opinion, have gender critical people come into this argument on the side against assisted suicide? Because I've noticed that has happened. That there are many, for instance, I think J.K. Rowling and various other people are sort of coming onto this side of the debate. And I've been writing about this for long enough that it was a lonely voice at first, and now many people are coming over, amongst which gender critical feminists, which is fantastic. But why has that happened?
Well, okay. I'll take one more, Kathleen, if that's all right. And see how we go on. Marco.
Hi. So Kathleen mentioned at the beginning about how the embedding the kind of assisted dying service within the NHS. It's not really about personal freedom. It's not about the negative right to kind of be not interfered with. But arguably, it's the fact that the state doesn't allow it does interfere with people's ability to end their own lives. And that's what's created this demand for the state-assisted suicide service. And then we've had I'm not sure if Kathleen will have heard of cases like Kenneth Law case in Canada, and there was another one in the UK as well, which is and you've mentioned also the suicide websites that have been shut down. So the government has kind of blocked off access to these to access to methods of reliable methods of suicide. And I'm just wondering what Kathleen's argument would be about limiting the state's ability to restrict people's freedom to end their own lives, so that they would have that negative liberty right not to be interfered with.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Marco. All right, Kathleen, if you
Right.
would, I know that's the fundamental premise of your book, that last question, but take it away.
No, they're all really good questions. On the abortion question, I don't know if you know what my position on abortion is, but anyway, I've recently actually written, and I don't know if you know this, and there's no reason why you should, but I have actually recently written some quite polemical pieces against the decriminalization of late abortion. And I do see parallels, although to be honest, I'm slightly high on cough medicine at the moment. I can't remember what they are, but I have written about the parallels between the decriminalization of late abortion. I mean, really, the arguments from autonomy is an obvious one. I'm not, I don't think abortion should be banned, I'm afraid. I mean, I wish I could think that, but I don't think that for complicated reasons. But I'm certainly open to parallels between the two cases in a way that I think other people might not be. That's all I can say now. Why are so many gender critical women involved? I think, I mean, there's this gut feeling that I had, speaking personally, when this arrived. It's the straight up propaganda that is flying at us, the idea that this is only a matter of realizing people's true desires and helping them compassionately. And I mean, it just smells bad to me, the dignity in dying propaganda, the way they had those posters on the tube trains, this really healthy, glamorous young woman dancing around her kitchen, happy at the thought that her family won't have to see her suffer. I found that incredibly dystopian, and in just the sort of way that I found the trans activist lobby's propaganda about, realizing one's true nature through chopping off body parts, highly suspicious. So we know that these battles about words, whether it's really suicide or whether it's deliverance, whether it's really a man or a woman, we know that these linguistic battles can mask moral atrocities. And we also don't trust, I would say personally anyway, don't trust systems, medical systems, to deliver on these existential areas like identity or death. That's not what medicine's supposed to set up for, and it's got confused if it's got involved in that stuff, in my view. So I think there are interesting parallels there. Okay, so on the negative right to non-interference, I actually say, so my argument is prone to misunderstanding at this point, so I want to be clear about what it is. So I say, if your defense of assisted death is freedom, it won't work, because all you could possibly be arguing for is a negative right to non-interference in your own activity, your own suicidal activity, and that's not what, in fact, is being asked for. But I do not say there is a right to non-interference myself, and I actually don't think there is. I think I'm really pleased that Britain has a healthy, proactive attitude towards suicide intervention, and I'm really pleased that they have shut down those pro-suicide websites where possible, because I do not think we should respect the right of people to end their own lives, which isn't to say that in some circumstances we might not let them, and it isn't to say that in some circumstances we might not even help. But that's a different claim from saying there's a general right of non-interference, like the default is we do not interfere. I don't think the default is that we do not interfere, because that would be to endorse the kind of hyper-liberal, hyper-individualized society that I really don't want to see exist. I don't think it exists. So I know I'll differ. I know, there's libertarians who really want to be able to kill themselves whenever they want to and to have the means to do so, but I just haven't built that way.
Good, thank you very much. Do you want to, not that it's an easy task, but do you want to define what you mean by hyperliberalism?
Oh, God. Well, I do in the book. I mean the sort of society that places this enormous effort on individual choices and sees the individual basically metaphysically as an island who, cut off from other human beings unless you want to make connections with them. So it sees all connections with other human beings as contractual or desired, and they can be retracted at will, pretty much. So it's a kind of society we are moving towards, where divorce is on the increase, friends are getting ghosted, surrogacies coming in to cut the mother off from the child, like basically all the old relationships between people that we used to think of as just given, and we were born into the world dependent on others, and we lived in communities dependent on others. That rhetoric has been replaced by the idea of the individual as kind of sovereign over all of his relationships. So the emphasis on the latter is what I think of as the hyperliberal society.
No, because just framing from that, just very quickly, I'm sorry to butt into the next hand, but very, very quickly, in terms of you do say across the course of the book that you want suicide to remain a taboo. You've kind of mentioned that already, but you also say that we need more compelling social narratives, which is that the idea that you describe how contemporary social mores have incentivized people to claim passive victimhood. So I'm just kind of intrigued by how we insert ourselves into a discussion where, on one hand, we've got this kind of collapse of social values and becoming more individualistic, while at the same time, the demand is that we're becoming much more passive and more victimized, or feel more victimized.
Yeah.
How you reconcile those two issues?
I don't think they're in conflict, obvious conflict to me, but I can't solve
but building a more united society, because you say hyperliberalism, then you mention global capitalism, technology, popular culture, all these things. You say create a wafer-thin picture of the self.
But just because all that could be true, but it could also be true that I don't think that communitarianism implies a culture of passivity or victimhood. That's just not true. There can be plenty of models of resilient courage, agency, and so on in communitarian societies. That bit, to be clear to everybody, comes when I'm discussing how the concept of suffering expands, like concept creep, the idea that suffering used to be understood in one way, but over the centuries it's become much bigger, and we're all suffering more now, and we're suffering in more numerous kinds of situations and more deeply. In the same way that we're all traumatized now, whereas only tiny numbers of people used to be traumatized. Now people have complex PTSD from car accidents where nobody got hurt. So that's a noted sociological phenomena. And I go on to say at that point, some people might say this is great because we're becoming more perceptive and more attuned to various forms of suffering. And I say, no, it's not great. We're actually becoming unconsciously wedded to the social cachet of victimhood. And it's actually terrible when you import insisted death into a system where suffering is creeping like this. And you can see that in Belgium and the Netherlands, where they euthanize people for unbearable suffering, unbearable psychological suffering with no underlying illness or physical complaint. So, 30-year-olds getting euthanized for PTSD, basically.
Yeah. No, very good. Sorry, Rachel, if you would. Sorry to trample over your introduction.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about the sacredness of human life, which got me thinking, I haven't actually heard the Church of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury, comment on this. It might be that I just haven't read what they've written or said, but I just wondered if anybody knows what their position is. My instinct tells me they should be against assisted dying, assisted suicide, but I don't know. Does anybody else know?
And that's a general question.
Kevin knows.
We'll come
Do you
on
want me
that
to say?
second. Hang on a second, Kevin. Hang on a second
Okay.
before we start a chat going on. I've got Christopher showing up, and then I've also got a note from Ashley that she would like to speak as well. So please feel free to unmute after Christopher, please. Chris.
Well, I understand the Archbishop of Canterbury is opposed to the bill. That's what I've read. While I've got the floor, can you indulge me for a minute? I've got family in Switzerland and family in Canada. Both countries are very well governed and could teach us a few lessons. Nobody gives a second thought to medical assistance in dying any more than they do to medical assistance in birthing when there's a difficult birth. It seems to have been accepted into these very civilized, law-abiding cultures. And the thing that nobody's mentioning, which has horrified me in my family, is seeing people in care homes, and the owner of one was reported recently as describing his inmates as cash machines. And people are in these care homes, in my view, being kept just this side of alive in order to keep pouring money into the pockets of the care home owner. I've seen that with a couple of my relatives. One of them was in such agony, he actually called the police and asked to be taken to a place of safety, which made a bit of a stink because the police actually did turn up. And he was then sent home to die peacefully at home, which he could have done weeks before, but at the cost of quite a few £1,000s going to this very expensive care home. I just think, I'm being a bit blunt here, the same number of people are going to die as would die anyway, and a lot fewer people are going to suffer than would suffer anyway, like my cousin agonizing. So there just seems to me to be all a bit too esoteric. Am I being a bit Philistine? Probably yes. I'll go back onto mute.
Thanks, Chris. Know your place, Chris. That's the spirit. Right, Ashley, are you out there? We'll take another question if that's all right, Kathleen, and then come back to you. Ashley, are you there?
Sorry, my mic is
There you
off.
go.
It's on now.
There
Okay.
you're on. Yeah.
I was just wondering if there isn't kind of a contradiction between this idea that we live in like a hyper liberal society in which choice is paramount and all the ways in which choice is really looked down on and viewed with suspicion. I find it kind of strange that in so many areas that I've dealt with, as a sociologist, there's so much energy goes into pointing out that choice is an illusion. And then in this one specific area, it suddenly became paramount. And this really hit home because I was doing a debate on Times Radio, and the paper reviews that you do, and it just so happened the first topic was assisted dying, and the person I was debating was going on about choice is paramount, autonomy. Go to commercial break, come back. The next issue is about obesity and junk food. And all of a sudden, choice is out the window, autonomy is out the window. It's all an illusion. And I just thought, well, isn't that convenient for you? So I just wondered if you could speak to that contradiction a little bit. I'm not convinced that we live in a society that puts so much emphasis on choice. I think something else is going on.
Thanks very much, Ashley. Kathleen,
Right.
do you want to come back on any of these?
Yes. Okay, so to Christopher's point, well, Canada is big, and there's lots of different views on assisted dying in Canada, I can assure you. And I believe you that the people you know have no problem with it, but I can also assure you there are people who have problems with it. So now what are we going to do? We're going to have to make up our own minds, aren't we? And look at the systems they have, and that's what I've tried to do in the book. I mean, even if everyone in Canada was absolutely 100% behind it, I would still be very worried about it. I just can't, I think that a lot of people don't know what goes on, and partly because nobody's looking particularly hard, because once you've got it there, there's no incentive to really look at how it's working, because death becomes this incredibly simple solution to every problem towards the end of life, including the one you mentioned. You said the same number of people are going to die anyway. I mean, you could say that, about in a number of contexts where it would sound absolutely awful, morally speaking. Oh, well, they're going to die anyway, so let's just make it a few years earlier. What's it going to... I just can't think like that. I think the thing is that death, an assisted death, especially when it's sort of presented in this rosy glow, everything's perfect kind of way, it just becomes this extremely seductive solution to all this complication, economic resources being straightened, the medical system collapsing, the pension system collapsing, care homes collapsing. So what are we going to do? We're going to kill them all off, basically. It's just too brutal. And really, I think we've got no alternative but to actually try and deal with the problems that you just mentioned. For example, you said care homes keeping people hanging on way past the point at which they want to die in order to take money from them. Well, that does sound like a problem, I completely admit, but surely there has got to be a better solution, or surely not the only solution is taking poison into the care homes. I mean, I just can't believe that we are that, limited in our thinking. So that's what I'd say to that. And then Ashley, yeah, I mean, in a sense, I'm sure I agree with you. I didn't say that we have a perfectly run society. I said we have a society that's governed by certain kind of fantasies. And what the hyperliberal society, as I understand it, is not one necessarily where choice is always respected. In fact, quite the contrary, because the more that people get choices, the more they somehow want other people to do stuff for them. And there seems to be some kind of vicious circle between those two things. Like, they don't want to do things on their own. They want to be given sort of handheld through the experiences, even though they say they really want the choice. So it doesn't surprise me that there's a conflict in practice and that these rhetorical devices are used strategically. I agree. I'm sure you're right, and you're the sociologist, so I definitely defer to you on that.
Thanks very much indeed. Look, can I ask you quickly about palliative care and hospice care? I'm filling in while other hands go up at the moment. But in terms of the, obviously hospice care is a wonderful thing. And I've been to a few, I don't know if you know the Maggie centers, which were about 30 years ago, 25 years ago, they originated. But these are kind of really beautiful places that actually give people some, dignity, to use a word that maybe is not appropriate. But also the case that, they're not on a crowded NHS ward, they're not on a corridor, they actually have some space and some decent facilities. But in terms of the rage against dying of the light, which comes in the Dylan Thomas book, a poem. It's actually much more that you accept your fate and go quietly. Do you know what I mean? I just wondered whether the rage is this a rhetorical flourish for the title of your book
Yeah, I
in
mean,
terms of against assisted dying, or whether you actually want people to challenge.
No, and I mean, fair enough, you missed it, that's fine. But I do make that clear quite early on. I'm not saying that you should rage against death itself. I'm saying it's a rhetorical device to rage. Let's rage against these assisted death services, which are coming, incoming. It's a global push for them. The legislation is spreading across the globe. And as we've seen, leadbeaters saying, no, we're bringing it back next Parliament, it's happening. We need to rage against that because there's a lot at stake. So that's the invocation of Dylan Thomas. I'm not saying that people should fight death no matter what. It sounds like that's not a great idea for many people. I mean, I don't know. I can't speak about that, but I'm not saying that. Definitely not saying that.
No, I know you weren't saying that. No, I have read your book cover to cover twice.
I know, but I mean, it's got 100.
But as a rhetorical flourish, I mean, I'm a great believer in Dylan Thomas's demands on his father to rage and stay with them. Do you know what I mean? That was a social demand on the parent. It wasn't the parent.
Don't give up too early. Don't give up too early, maybe.
Exactly. Pam, if you would.
I'm so pissed that they got it so badly wrong in the House that leadbeaters just messed it up. Because I want this for me. I absolutely want this right for me. I'm nearer to dying than you are. And I want this to be sorted out by the time I might really, really want it. So, and it's something I think I've always believed, that I don't want to just die. I mean, I've seen people who've died badly, and it does happen. Also, I was able, with my little cat that I loved dearly, I was able to get her killed in the last few hours of her life when she was in agony. She was suffocated with cancer. And even then, even the vet, with all the very presumably well-practiced systems they have, the last few seconds, few minutes, it was a struggle. And I don't know, Kathleen, whether in the research you've done, whether you've looked at the actual techniques of administering a gentle death, a decent death, a pain relatively unstruggling death, what you found out, because I've certainly been hearing that actually the systems that are in place are not brilliant. It doesn't always work, and that there's a sense sometimes that people are actually struggling to come back. So that's a bit depressing if it isn't actually something where you just very beautifully and peacefully drift off to sleep, never to return. So I don't know what you found out about any of the actual physiological processes involved. Please tell me it's working really well.
Well, excuse me. I mean, on the general point that you're nearer death than me, I mean, yeah, I have no idea, to be honest, neither do you, but on average, maybe.
You sound quite bad, Kathleen.
Sorry, I know exactly. You'll be sorry. But I think, look, I don't doubt people want this. I can see it. People tell me all the time, I really want this. How dare you take this away from me, you merciless so-and-so. But I'm afraid I'm just saying, look, it's not like nobody's offering you any other options. What I am saying is we should be investing in palliative care. And I can see there's a palliative care doctor in the chat because he keeps posting incensed replies to people. I mean, if there is a technology available that is not just death or nothing, that technology has come a long way. They've got all sorts of understandings of pain and the side effects of pain relieving drugs that they didn't have even 10 years ago. And, it's amazing what they can do. They can get video games to distract you from your pain. They can put blockers in all over the place, and nausea, things that people used to worry about, like nausea and constipation and stuff, they can deal with those too. Now, it isn't properly funded. I absolutely concede that. But that's a separate issue from the idea that it's not possible to relieve suffering at the end of the life. Now, we don't actually do all that for pets because people usually are looking to do it cheaper. And death is cheaper. So, vets kill their cat.
70 bloody quid, I tell you.
Exactly. I think people should think more about that. Quite often they wheel out the, we kill our animals when they're ready to go, but people also kill their animals because they want to go on holiday, and they kill their animals because they can't afford the vet's bills. And that is exactly the sort of economic consideration that will be imported into the human system once assisted death is there, advertised in the waiting room in the NHS. So I think that's rather sinister. As for the drugs, I'm totally open the floor to the doctor present, but it's my understanding that actually the drugs, I'm afraid to say at the moment, aren't particularly, well, it's ironic, but they say they're not safe. But what they mean by safe is that they don't kill you quickly necessarily. And so there's 14% complications cited in Oregon. And that's actually probably an understatement, I think, because in Oregon, the drugs get posted out to people and they take them without doctors present. So quite often you wouldn't even know the complications. And there are cases of people taking much longer than they thought. There are cases of people experiencing all sorts of, awful side effects. I think that's really worrying, but I tend to think it's not the biggest consideration from my side of the fence, because it will get sorted out. People will find better ways to kill you.
Well, they can't even sort out a proper assassination death on a gurney. Sometimes those go all wrong.
Well, yeah, I mean, whether our
same drugs,
British system will sort it out, I'm highly skeptical.
Yes, we haven't had enough practice.
In a privatized system, will eventually work out how to kill people smoothly. But even so, for me, it will still be a no.
Okay, well, we have to stop this jury conversation. Johnny and then Claude.
I just wanted to pick up on this point about freedom versus dependency. I think it's came up in your introduction, and I think other people have kind of addressed it. I don't think there's necessarily a contradiction between the two. I don't think we all live in societies, and so therefore we always have dependencies on each other. I mean, your ability to express to express your right to free speech is at the moment being mediated by thousands of people around the world who are doing bits and bobs to make sure the internet keeps running. So we're all dependent on each other to do our freedom. So I don't think that's a strong argument for or against euthanasia. From a personal point of view, I'm kind of like Death's Winged Chariot is like hurrying near, because I was diagnosed with cancer last year. So I'm kind of like treading the knife's edge at the moment as to what will happen. But I've already playing that with the oncologist that if the cancer metastasizes, I don't want any chemical treatment. I prefer to go out, go out in my own time, in my own space. Dying in my own bed with my children weeping and wailing around the bed. I mean, that's my choice. Doesn't have to be everybody's. And so I personally, facing from a personal perspective, I would say, yeah, give me the was it the green pill or the red pill or whatever it was of that film. So basically, I think the conversations about how it's going to be done, I think we've really got to get to the basis of should it be done? Should it be done? Should it not be done? To bring in real things about, does the National Health Service, can it cope? Can it not cope? I think you've got to really get your fundamentals sorted out first. And like I say, I think as a fundamental, I think you should. As when it comes to agency, I mean, the ultimate agency and autonomy is about your own body. And if you can't decide to turn it off, then you don't have any freedom at all.
Okay. Again, like I said, it's very central to the book, so we'll get Kathleen come back on that in a moment. But Claude, if you would.
Thank you. Yes. Just say something about the drugs. It is astounding how little evidence is out there around assisted deaths. People think there's loads of evidence, but actually there's extraordinarily little. The only study that ever looked at adverse effects was in the Netherlands, and that was 30 years ago and has never been repeated. There was more evidence for thalidomide than currently exists for assisted dying drugs. Somebody struggled to believe what I was saying on the chat. Not a single drug regulatory authority anywhere in the world has assessed assisted dying drugs for efficacy or safety. So that's just a fact. But I wanted to ask Kathleen something, and thank you for today, and particularly for your efforts through your virus is much appreciated. I just wonder, I'm a pragmatist and a realist, and I realize that enthusiasts will want to bring this back either in the next parliaments in Westminster or Holyrood, or certainly the next parliament after that. I just wonder, is it practical to consider, if it's going to happen, a system whereby assisted deaths are provided completely outside of healthcare? That's been the situation in Switzerland for 70 years. The downside in Switzerland is there's no statutory monitoring. But if that was included as well, and by statutory I mean transparent monitoring, and it was outside healthcare, would that resolve perhaps not all, but some of the problems?
Thank you very much indeed, Todd. Thank you. Kathleen, do you want to come back on those 2 points? The
Yes.
freedom point of
Yeah.
Johnny and
Yeah, we are all dependent on each other. I mean, I don't think, I'll have to think more about this, but I don't think my argument is just, we're dependent on each other, so we shouldn't do this. I think my argument is in line with your suggestion, way. We should value dependence more than we do, and we shouldn't get carried away by fantasies of freedom, which are inaccurately describe our situation. We are dependent on each other, and moreover, the things that we demand that systems provide for me personally will have effects on other people that may not be as beneficial. So for you to get what you want may be wonderful, and it may be wonderful for your family. I'll take your word for it, but you can't just get it for you. You will therefore make it available for everyone in that situation, and this will impose consequences on people who do not want that choice, or who are sucked or hoovered into the system inadvertently, or because of coercion, or because we haven't talked about that, or for any number of reasons, chronic depression. So the point is not then you then went on to say we should work out, should this be done, and then so get first principles straight, then think about implementing. I'm afraid that's just not how I think about morality generally. I can't divorce, and neither I think can you or anyone, shoulds from practical instantiations of them. So there's no use just working out that this is an absolutely fundamental thing that people should have if it's going to result in practice in miscarriages of justice, unlawful killings, devastated families, early deaths that didn't need to have happened because people could have actually gone on for years, they're faulty prognosis or whatever. The should absolutely takes its color from the way that it will work in the system that we have. And we couldn't talk about utopias, but we're not in a utopia. We're in fact in a medical dystopia, I think, and this will only make it worse. So that's what I think about that. To Claude's question, yes, I think if we have to have it, it would be best to have it completely detached from the medical system. Doesn't seem to me like a highly technical procedure to put an IV drip in or hand over some pills. And it should, I don't know how exactly you would run it completely separately from the healthcare system, because obviously there'd have to be some interface between getting the diagnosis and then sort of releasing that person in to the purview of the private system, or whatever it is, the separate system. But that has to be better than allowing the very same doctor that's treating you for cancer to then suggest that he kills you or helps kill you. I mean, I can't see that as that's a disaster, that system. So if we had to have it, that would be one of the things that I would think. And I would also think it would have to be for the relief of pain pretty strictly, rather than suffering being this sort of wide descriptor that could include people who completely have no pain whatsoever at the moment, but just want to die.
Yeah. The suffering was actually left out of the bill altogether, wasn't it? Because it's so hard to define what we might mean by it. Instead, they replace it with harm and things like that, which obviously is also equally difficult. Right. Kevin, if you would, please.
Right. Just on because there's a little bit of discussion in the chat about the drugs that are used. First of all, the oral drugs that are proposed for the bill in Britain have taken up to 137 hours to work. So that's between ingestion and death. These are not, when you look at the sort of protests that Amnesty International and other organizations make about the 20 minutes that it can take for executions by lethal injection in the United States, then basically that gives you some sort of comparison of what we're talking about. So it's not necessarily a really lovely death as people sort of like to convey. I think Kathleen makes a really excellent point about this sort of advertising, the millions and millions of pounds of advertising that organizations like Dignity and Dying are actually spending to try and tell us that this is a lovely kind of thing, and you can jump around in your pajamas and have a great time, and then die peacefully a little bit later. And so I just wanted to say something about that first. But I think the really key issue here is suicide. What is our attitude towards suicide? And I think it has to be it's a difficult one because, of course, people have to be free to walk up onto the building ledge. We need to allow people to be allowed to have the freedom to do things that we think are dangerous. We don't want to be patronizing and stop them. But on the other hand, if you see somebody teetering on the data or on the data on the building ledge, our attitude has to be to stop them. I think that's what a healthy society does. We value other lives just the same as we protect people who might be in danger of being killed by others. We protect people who are in danger of being killed by themselves. That is our human response to that. We want to protect people from harm and from violence, and even if it's being done to themselves. So I think that's the very basic aspect of the whole thing. Is it's not so much the suicide's attitude towards suicide as the people who are witnessing it. So when we see the man on the building ledge, the proverbial man, do we try and talk him down, or do we give him a push? This is the question that's being asked.
Very good, very good. Obviously, I'm still intrigued by the idea that, Kevin, you've insisted on calling it assisted suicide for many, many years. Kathleen says assisted death, and then there's assisted dying, which is the polite House of Lords version. I just don't know whether that's just purely marketing, as we're all opposed to in our hyper-liberal world, or whether it means anything more than that. But you can come back to that if you want. Ashley, if you would.
Yeah, so I was just thinking about the idea of the title of the book, Do Not Go Gentle, because my dad has stage 4 cancer, and he was diagnosed 3 years ago. And it was funny because I was just talking to him last night, and I quoted that line. I quoted that line from Dylan Thomas to him because that was his attitude completely at the very, like, as soon as he was diagnosed, he's like, I'm not going gentle. But this was completely beyond the pale. Like when he got that diagnosis, first of all, they dragged their feet. Like the Canadian healthcare system has no sense of urgency whatsoever. But then when he finally gets it, he was asking about treatment options, and the doctor kept shouting at him, "It won't change the endpoint. It won't change the endpoint. It's not going to change anything." And he was like upset by the fact that she just kept saying this. But she was telling him, accept your fate, like go quietly. It was very clear that by that idea of like I've heard it a few times where people say like, okay, we're not saying like fight against death. But, we keep saying that because we're like implicitly accepting that the fight against death is stupid and futile and you really should just kind of show yourself out. But I think there's something really powerful in fighting against death like that. And, even if he hadn't survived, touch wood, such a long time after that diagnosis, I feel like I have to like justify the fact that he fought, I have to say, oh, well, he actually lived. He's still alive now. He's still playing hockey, 3 years after this woman clearly wanted him to die, like she was offering Maid. That's it. There's nothing else. So it absolutely, it changes the way that it is viewed, that the healthcare system views the treatment of cancer, for instance. So I think that's a really important thing that we should recognize, that the idea that you would rage against death is actually implicitly kind of stigmatized now, especially in Canada. And sorry to talk for too long, but just to say, like, this is anecdotal, of course, but the attitude toward suffering, the attitude toward discomfort, and the prospect of discomfort has utterly changed as well. So as soon as people get this diagnosis, I've seen this so many times. I have an enormous family, so unfortunately, as people age, I've seen this. The moment that there is that diagnosis, like, that's it. I want this to be over as quickly as possible. I want no discomfort whatsoever. And that is, I think, extremely scary to me, that how quickly, you're sapping, like, the people talk about, like, oh, well, I can't really afford to take care of my loved ones. Or people that actually say that, like, we have jobs and that sort of thing. We can't really afford to take care of the elderly. But you're also, like, sapping the younger generation's socialization and, like, caring for older people, and which is, I think, another part of it, that the idea that you have a duty to care for other people is like, oh, I don't want to be a burden on them. And you shouldn't. And that's the idea. You shouldn't make yourself a burden on these people. But I can't remember who said this. I'm sorry. But it was someone, religious figure in the UK, said, I want to be a burden on others as I die, my family as I die. And I want them to be a burden on me. It's called love. Kevin's laughing because I'm sure you know the source of that quote.
Very good. Very good. No, I think it's important. I think there's two things. One is that, as I mentioned, Maggie centers, because it's one thing I know of hospice care. Charles Jenks's wife was the Maggie of the Maggie centers, and it's anecdotal, but he always says that she was dying of cancer and came up with the idea, and it gave her another 18 months of life to fight for the realization of her dream of building some decent hospice care. So I think there's an element of truth to the psychological, delaying of the inevitable in some respects. And the second thing, I suppose, is that we're talking about cancer here a lot, the big C. But in fact, when you look at the assisted dying bill, there's an awful lot of discussion about issues that you wouldn't even think were terminal. But if you believe that they're terminal, if a doctor gives you a diagnosis, even if you are Down syndrome, you can be talked into some of these things. And I think there's an insidiousness to this campaign, which maybe we're missing a little bit as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with the point that I took Ashley to be making at the beginning of that, which was, you do, as I put it in the book, you just want your healthcare provider to have a naturally low tolerance for death. I mean, that's something that we have taken for granted. Sometimes we've criticized doctors for being too keen to keep us alive. You hear a lot about saying, no, they need to let people go. But most of the time, it's absolutely fundamental to the doctor-patient relationship that you both, if possible, want to get better. They want you to get better. You want to get better. All of your discussions are predicated around that, all of about the risks and the benefits of various treatments, the knowns and the unknowns and all the rest of it. In order to bring assisted death onto the statutes, we have to change the foundational aims of the NHS. We have to say, because they're directed towards improving health, we'd have to add a bit that says and assisting people to die, and the doctor's role then becomes bifurcated potentially. They have to work out, for these cases I help improve life, for these cases I end life, and how is that going to play out across the population of doctors and their psyches? We can't say. I don't think, for some people, they'll handle that split very well, very responsibly. Other people, absolutely not. They'll get completely confused. And why wouldn't they get confused? Because frankly, doctors don't know any better than anyone else when the right moment is to kill somebody. It's just not something that you get training for. There's no guidelines. It's an existential, philosophical question. It's not a medical question at all. So I completely agree about that. And I also agree, as you might expect, with the general point about changing the attitude to suffering. I'm not surprised if that's happened in Canada. I expect it to happen. We're generally, as a society, trying to eliminate suffering wherever it happens as soon as possible. And with death now in the mix as like the ultimate way to stop suffering, definitively, it wouldn't be at all surprising if that had a knock-on effect on general attitudes towards fighting, going through difficult circumstances, pushing oneself to the limit of what one can endure. All of those concepts will become strangely old-fashioned when there's an alternative, I think.
Yeah, very good. Mark, you disappeared off the screen there. I don't know whether you're still here.
Listen, thank you, Catherine, for all of that. I mean, I am a relative newbie in palliative care, unlike Claude, who's been in it since the dinosaurs. I've only been doing it for 25 years. But it is interesting that one of in my kind of limited dealings with the press, one of the comments that's been made is that the narrative is being very clearly controlled by the pro side. And the idea is that it was likened to me like Brexit. The Brexit message to leave is much easier to deliver than the one to stay. And it feels to me that the message that you're giving very eloquently involves a degree of patience which many people aren't prepared to give, and some of the subtleties that are being driven, some of the subtleties are being missed by the pro side. It's interesting, certainly from my experience, having been in this debate for 20 years and been involved with lots of debates recently, that I have never been so gaslit in my life. I've been told that despite the fact that I have devoted 25 years of my life to dealing with dying patients, for the very fact that I wanted to fight the narrative that they are dying anyway, therefore they don't get a scan. They're dying anyway, therefore let's not treat them with antibiotics. They're dying anyway, so let's not do this or that. I find that narrative absolutely distasteful because it perpetuates the vulnerability that's there. I've certainly been told, as I'm sure you have as well, that I just need to learn to be more compassionate. I need to learn to listen. I was told by a retired radiologist who sat in a room looking at films that I need to learn how to listen to patients who are dying. And I've been told that I don't take the situation seriously, all of those from people who are very pro. And it seems to me the narrative, it's all about narrative for me, and I find it frustrating that it's hard to get that cutting edge where you can, it needs some explanation to unpack the narrative to say this is not a great idea for all the reasons that you've kind of unpacked and more in my view, than just to say, no, it's about choice. And I don't know what your voice would be or what your wisdom would be on how to change the balance of that narrative, perhaps, if that makes any sense.
I'm not, obviously I'm not a doctor, but I certainly get lots of accusations of this being some sort of abstraction or game for me, and don't I understand the nature of suffering? And luckily, all of those objections were made to me in the last public controversy in which I contributed, so I'm completely immune to them now, and I just bash on regardless, because I know that I am motivated by compassion. It's just that my view of compassion is different. Like, we have a different view of what the most compassionate thing for a system to do is, and you just have to sort of ignore the gaslighting, which is very annoying. I completely agree. But generally speaking, I'm not so convinced that that's the pro side is winning the argument. I think there's been some polling very recently that suggests that even though the public is still in principle in favor of assisted death, of course that leaves so much open when they are then told about the details of Leadbeater's bill. They're not for that bill. And what they want, it seems to me, is a system that probably can't exist in reality. They want loads of safeguards in there that would be really expensive and hold things up. And they want time-rich, resource-rich doctors to be doing it, which of course they won't be. And I think when you really put together the reality with the fantasy, people are able to see that with the NHS we have, it would not be a good idea. So public opinion has changed, even in the last couple of years that we've been discussing this. And I just think, just one last thought is that for me, the single most effective consideration, both for me personally when I first started thinking about it, and I've seen have an effect on others, is this idea that it's not just a choice for those that want it, it's a choice for those that don't. And every, my mom and dad, if this comes in, my dad's 92, they will then have to think, do I want this? Or not just do I want this, but how can I explain that I don't want this? Not that I'll be asking them, but some relatives will be, and some carers will be. And all human nature is out there, there'll be various permutations, but now it will be available for everybody. They will have the diagnosis and they will be in the ballpark and they will have to find reasons not to go. And that is a changed society, a very changed society from the one that we have now. So for many people, that is not a compassionate situation. I mean, it isn't for me.
Very good. Slightly depressing end, but a powerful one, I think. Kathleen, thank you very much indeed for that. And thanks everybody for attending. Just to remind you, if you haven't already got it, Do Not Go Gentle, the case against assisted death by Kathleen Stock is available. Again, we're posting it in the chat room if you want to go straight to it. Look, just very quickly, in terms of Canada, which has been mentioned a few times, not least by some Canadians, but assisted deaths are being offered anything. As Kathleen says in the book, you can get assisted death for anything from poverty, homelessness, a lack of daily support, and feeling like a burden. How many of us have not felt like a burden in our lives? And Baroness Warnock, who's a bit of a heroine of mine, actually you quoted a negative statement by her who said, if you are demented, you're wasting people's lives, your family's lives, and you're wasting the resources of the NHS. So there's a terrible comparison between euthanasia and eugenics creeping into the conversation, maybe if we let it run away from ourselves. So anyway, so it's important to understand why it all happened, the consequences of this debate, and you'll find it here in a tremendous book. If you don't know anything about it, or if you think you do, please have a read of it. It's a tremendous read, a readable read, which you wouldn't have thought maybe by the topic itself. So thanks very much to Kathleen Stock for, I was going to say manfully, that's too terribly gender specific, but manfully putting up with her illness. And I'm really, really delighted that you managed to kind of suffer for your art. And
thank you very much. And thank you, Austin, for inviting me. And thank you, everybody, for brilliant questions.
Thanks also to Thanks to Ashley Frawley for their insights and for being the backup if Kathleen flaked out. Thanks to Alistair Donald for manning the controls. And thank you, everyone, for being here. We would normally go down to the pub, but we're online, so I'm going to have a drink myself. Thank you all very much. Kathleen, get some, I think you need some brandy and lemon, as my grandmother would say. All the best. Look after yourself. Get well soon, Kathleen, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.